I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when I saw her marching through 2 feet of snow toward my front door like some kind of angry penguin in a puffy coat. The knock that followed could have woken the dead 3 counties over. "Can I help you?" I asked, opening the door to find a woman in her mid-40s with highlighted blonde hair and a clipboard clutched to her chest like it was the Declaration of Independence. "I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association," she announced, her breath creating angry little clouds in the frigid February air. "And we need to discuss your property violations immediately." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. I'd been living in my house outside Breckenridge, Colorado for 3 years now, and this was the first I'd heard about any HOA. "Property violations? What are you talking about?" Patricia pointed dramatically at my roof. "Those snowdrifts are completely unacceptable. They're at least 4 feet high in some places. You're required to remove snow accumulation that exceeds 6 inches within 48 hours of any snowfall." I looked up at my roof, which admittedly had some impressive snow buildup after the week of storms we'd just had. "I'm sorry, but I'm not part of any HOA. When I bought this place, there was no mention of an association." Her face turned a shade of red that clashed terribly with her pink scarf. "That's impossible. Every property in Meadowbrook Hills is part of our association. It's in the deed restrictions." "Well, my deed says otherwise," I replied, trying to keep my tone friendly despite her attitude. "Look, it's freezing out here. Why don't you check your records and we can sort this out?" "I don't need to check anything," Patricia snapped. "I'm issuing you a citation right now. You have 72 hours to remove that snow, or you'll be fined $500. After that, it's an additional $200 per day until you comply." She ripped a paper from her clipboard and thrust it at me. I took it more out of shock than anything else. "This is ridiculous," I said. "I'm telling you I'm not part of your HOA. Then you can take it up at our next board meeting, but the citation stands. Have a good day, Mr. Jenkins." She turned and trudged back through the snow, leaving deep footprints in her wake. I closed the door and stared at the paper in my hand. It was printed on official-looking letterhead with Meadowbrook Hills HOA emblazoned across the top. Below that was my address, a description of my supposed violation, and the fine structure Patricia had mentioned. At the bottom was a date for a hearing if I wanted to contest the citation. 2 weeks away. My name is Derek Jenkins, and I'd moved to Colorado from Texas 3 years ago after selling my software company. I'd wanted peace and quiet, mountain views, and good skiing. What I didn't want was someone telling me what I could and couldn't do with my own property. Especially when I'd specifically chosen a house that wasn't part of an HOA. I pulled out my laptop and found the file with my property documents. I'd bought the place from an elderly couple who'd lived here for 40 years. The house sat on 15 acres at the edge of what I'd thought was just a neighborhood name, not an actual association. I scrolled through the deed, the title insurance policy, and all the closing documents. Nowhere did it mention an HOA, covenants, or deed restrictions. The next day, I decided to do some research. I drove into Breckenridge proper and stopped by the Summit County Clerk and Recorder's office. A helpful clerk named Maria pulled up the records for my property. "Here's your deed," she said, turning her monitor so I could see. "Recorded 3 years ago when you purchased the property. Let me check for any restrictions or covenants." She clicked through several screens. "No, I'm not seeing anything filed against your property regarding homeowner association rules." "What about the other properties in my area?" I asked. "Meadowbrook Hills." Maria did another search. "Okay, so there are deed restrictions filed for properties in that subdivision. Looks like they were recorded starting about 20 years ago. But your property isn't part of that plat. See here. She pointed at a map on her screen. Your land is on this older plat from 1978. The Meadowbrook Hills subdivision was developed later in 2004 on adjacent land. Your property predates it. I felt a weight lift off my chest. So I'm definitely not part of their HOA. Not according to these records. Your property has a completely different legal description. It was never included in the subdivision plat or the covenant documents. I thanked Maria and asked for copies of everything. Armed with my documentation, I felt confident this would be a simple misunderstanding to clear up. I had no idea how wrong I was. 3 days later, I received a formal letter in the mail from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. It informed me that I'd failed to comply with their citation and was now being fined $500. An invoice was enclosed along with instructions for payment. I called the number on the letterhead. A woman answered with a chirpy, "Meadowbrook Hills HOA, this is Brenda speaking." "Hi Brenda, this is Derek Jenkins. I received a citation and a fine from your association, but there's been a mistake. My property isn't part of the HOA. Let me pull up your file," I heard typing. "Okay, Mr. Jenkins, I see here that you're at 2847 Mountain Vista Road. That's correct. Then you're definitely part of our association. You're showing as delinquent on your annual dues too. You owe 3 years of back dues plus late fees. That comes to $4,200. My jaw actually dropped. $4,000. I don't owe you anything. I have documentation from the county that my property was never included in your subdivision or your covenants. Sir, if you'd like to dispute this, you'll need to attend the hearing. It's scheduled for next Thursday at 7 in the evening at the community center." "Fine. I'll be there. Just so you're aware, failure to pay your fines and dues can result in a lien being placed on your property." "You can't put a lien on my property for debts I don't owe," I said, my patience wearing thin. "We'll see you Thursday, Mr. Jenkins." She hung up. I spent the next week gathering more documentation. I got a surveyor to come out and confirm my property boundaries. I had him provide a written statement that my land was not part of the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision. I made copies of everything, organized it in a folder, and prepared for the hearing like I was going to trial. Thursday evening arrived with another snowstorm. I drove carefully to the Meadowbrook Hills Community Center, a nice building with stone facades and big windows. Inside, about 30 people sat in rows of folding chairs facing a long table where 5 people sat. Patricia Henderson was in the center, looking official and stern. I signed in with Brenda, who gave me a tight smile and took a seat. The board worked through several items of business first. They approved new landscaping restrictions, discussed plans for a summer pool party, and voted to increase annual dues by $50. Finally, Patricia cleared her throat and looked directly at me. Next item. Property violation and delinquent dues for 2847 Mountain Vista Road. "Mr. Jenkins, please come forward." I walked to the front, my folder tucked under my arm. There was a small podium facing the board table. I stood behind it, feeling like I was back in school facing the principal. "Mr. Jenkins, you've been cited for failure to remove excessive snow accumulation from your roof, and our records show you've never paid your HOA dues since purchasing your property 3 years ago. What do you have to say?" "I have documentation proving my property is not part of this HOA," I said calmly. I opened my folder and pulled out copies for each board member. "My deed makes no mention of your association. The county records show my property is on a different plat that predates your subdivision. I've had a surveyor confirm that my land was never included in Meadowbrook Hills." Patricia barely glanced at the papers. "Mr. Jenkins, Your property is clearly within our boundaries. Just because you claim ignorance doesn't exempt you from our rules and dues." "It's not about ignorance," I countered. "It's about legal facts. My property cannot be subject to restrictions that were never recorded against it. If you look at the survey, you'll see my land parcel has a completely different legal description from the properties in your subdivision." One of the other board members, an older man with gray hair, was actually reading through the documents. "Patricia, this survey does show his property is on the 1978 plat, and I don't see any HOA covenants recorded against it." Patricia shot him an irritated look. "Tom, his house is right here in our neighborhood. He uses our roads, he benefits from our community standards, and he needs to pay his fair share." "Actually, I have my own driveway that connects directly to Mountain Vista Road, which is a public county road," I interjected. "I don't use any private HOA roads." "That's irrelevant," Patricia snapped. "The board has voted and you're in violation. You owe the association $4,700 total. That includes your back dues, late fees, and the snow removal fine. If you don't pay within 30 days, we'll file a lien against your property." Tom raised his hand hesitantly. "Shouldn't we have our attorney review his documentation first?" "I mean, if he's right about the legal description, we're not wasting money on attorney fees for this," Patricia interrupted. "Mr. Jenkins is trying to shirk his responsibilities. I've seen it before. People buy into nice neighborhoods and then don't want to follow the rules." "Well, it doesn't work that way. The citation stands. This hearing is concluded." I stood there, stunned. "You're not even going to consider the evidence. We've considered it. Our decision is final. You can appeal by submitting a written request within 10 days, but the fines continue to accrue during the appeal process." "Good evening, Mr. Jenkins." I gathered my papers and walked out, my face hot with anger despite the cold night air. The board moved on to discussing Christmas decoration guidelines as I left. 2 weeks later, I received another letter. The HOA had added another $1,400 in fines. Apparently, I'd failed to remove the snow again after a fresh storm, and they'd also cited me for having a non-approved mailbox. My mailbox was a standard black post-mounted box that had been there when I bought the house. I decided it was time to hire an attorney. I found a local lawyer named Richard Morrison, who specialized in property law. His office was in Frisco, about 20 minutes from my house. Richard was in his 50s, with the kind of weathered face that comes from years of Colorado mountain living. "This is interesting," he said after I'd explained the situation and shown him all my documentation. "They clearly don't have jurisdiction over your property, but they're trying to bully you into compliance anyway." "Can they actually file a lien?" I asked. "They can file one, but it wouldn't be valid. The problem is, even an invalid lien can cloud your title and cause problems if you try to sell or refinance. We'd have to go to court to get it removed, which costs time and money." Richard leaned back in his chair. "The better approach is to be proactive. We should file a lawsuit asking the court for a declaratory judgment that your property isn't subject to their covenants. We can also seek an injunction preventing them from taking any action against you." "How much is this going to cost me?" "I'll be honest, probably $5,000 to $10,000, depending on how much they fight it. But if you don't do something, they're going to keep harassing you and potentially damage your property rights." I thought about it for approximately 2 seconds. "Let's do it." I'm not paying them a penny for something I don't owe. Richard filed the lawsuit the following week. We sued the Meadowbrook Hills HOA, Patricia Henderson personally in her capacity as president, and the other board members. We asked the court to declare that my property was not subject to the HOA's covenants, to enjoin them from fining or taking any action against me, and to award me attorney's fees for having to bring the suit. The HOA's response came a month later. They'd hired their own attorney, a firm out of Denver called Mitchell and Associates. Their answer to our complaint denied everything and asserted that my property was indeed part of the HOA, regardless of what the recorded documents said. They also filed a counterclaim, alleging that I owed the association over $8,000 in fines and dues at that point. "They're doubling down," Richard said when he called to tell me about the counterclaim. "This is going to be more contentious than I thought." The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings. There were motions, responses, discovery requests, and depositions. The HOA demanded copies of all my property records, which I provided. We demanded copies of their governing documents, meeting minutes, and records showing how they determined my property was part of the association. What we found was illuminating. The HOA had been formed in 2004 when the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision was developed. Their original covenants covered 52 lots. Over the years, as those lots sold and homes were built, the association had collected dues and enforced their rules. But at some point about 5 years ago, they'd redrawn their boundary map to include several properties that bordered the subdivision, including mine. There was no legal basis for this expansion. They'd simply decided that neighboring properties should be part of the association and started treating them as such. "This is worse than I thought," Richard said during one of our meetings. "They've been doing this to multiple properties. You're just the first one who's pushed back hard enough to go to court. Are you serious? How have they gotten away with this? Most people probably paid the fines rather than fight. A $500 fine is annoying, but it's less than the cost of hiring a lawyer. The HOA is counting on that. It's basically a shakedown operation." As if to prove his point, Patricia Henderson appeared at my door again in late April. The snow had finally melted, and I was doing some yard work when her silver Lexus pulled up my driveway. "Mr. Jenkins, we need to talk," she said, getting out of her car. She was wearing expensive-looking jeans and a cashmere sweater. "My attorney has advised me not to speak with you directly while we're in litigation," I replied, pulling off my gardening gloves. "Oh, don't be dramatic. I'm here to offer you a settlement. The board has authorized me to waive all your fines if you agree to pay your dues going forward and drop the lawsuit. My property isn't part of your HOA, Patricia. I'm not paying anything. You're being unreasonable. Do you know how much you're spending on legal fees? I'm trying to help you save money here. By paying you money I don't legally owe, that's not helping me. That's extortion." Her face hardened. "Fine, then we'll see you in court. And when we win, you're going to owe us every penny, plus our attorney fees. Think about that while you're writing checks to your lawyer." She got back in her car and drove off, kicking up gravel from my driveway. I immediately called Richard and told him about the interaction. "Document everything," he advised. "Keep a log of every time she contacts you. This could actually help us show a pattern of harassment." The case slowly worked its way through the court system. We were scheduled for a hearing on our motion for summary judgment in July. Summary judgment is a way to win a case without going to trial if the facts aren't in dispute. We were arguing that the undisputed facts, all the recorded documents, clearly showed my property wasn't part of the HOA, and therefore there was nothing for a jury to decide. The hearing was held in the Summit County Courthouse in Breckenridge. Richard and I arrived early and took our seats at the plaintiff's table. Patricia Henderson was there with 2 other board members and their attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her 30s named Jessica Mitchell. Judge Raymond Warren entered and we all stood. Judge Warren was in his early 60s, with a reputation for being fair but no nonsense. He'd reviewed all the briefs and documents ahead of time. "Counsel, I've read your submissions," Judge Warren began. "Miss Mitchell, I have to say, I'm struggling to understand your client's position here. The recorded documents seem quite clear that Mr. Jenkins's property was never made subject to the HOA covenants." Jessica Mitchell stood. "Your Honor, while the original covenants may not have explicitly listed Mr. Jenkins's property, the association has historically treated all properties within its geographical boundaries as members. Mr. Jenkins has benefited from the association's activities, such as maintaining neighborhood standards that preserve property values. Benefiting from something doesn't create a legal obligation to pay for it," Judge Warren replied. "If I enjoy looking at my neighbor's well-maintained garden, that doesn't mean I owe him dues. The question is whether there's a legally enforceable covenant against Mr. Jenkins's property. What's your evidence of that?" "The association's bylaws define the boundaries based on geographical markers, not just the specific lot numbers in the original plat," Mitchell argued. "Mr. Jenkins's property falls within those boundaries." "But bylaws can't unilaterally create restrictions on property that was never subject to the covenants to begin with," Richard interjected, standing up. "Your Honor, this is basic property law. Covenants run with the land, but only if they're properly recorded and only against the properties specifically described in the restriction documents. The HOA can't expand its jurisdiction just by changing its bylaws." Judge Warren nodded. "Mr. Morrison is correct, Miss Mitchell, unless you can show me something in the recorded documents that puts Mr. Jenkins on notice that his property was subject to these restrictions. I don't see how your client has any authority over him."